Okay, the recording has started. Abdullah?
Yes, Brian is on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Abdul. Hi.
Hey, Brian. Okay, so I think we can get started right now. We have a lot of people on already. So I think we can get started now with the introduction on Hyperledger. You know, this is the first time for us to have you, Brian, join our meetup. There's a lot of new guests on here today, so thank you, everyone, and welcome, everyone.
Hi, everyone. This is Abdurrahman Hazm.
Hi, Abdurrahman. Thank you for making it.
Appreciate it. Thank you for allowing this opportunity.
Amazing. Okay. Brian, would you like to get started with an introduction on Hyperledger?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Behlendorf, Executive Director of Hyperledger. And I really appreciate the invitation to come and speak. I've not yet been able to travel to Saudi Arabia, and I hope to at some point this year or soon. However, you know, the situation being what it is, I don't think that'll happen this year. But in lieu of that, I thought it would be a really good opportunity to connect with what feels like a growing community there and in the region of interest in enterprise blockchain technology and in particular in Hyperledger. So I really appreciate the invitation to speak. Also with me on the call is David Boswell. David, go ahead and say hi.
Hey everyone, how are you? It's really exciting to see you know, us doing some more regional activities in the area, and I would love to support this community with doing more in the future. So let me know how I can help.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, David.
You want me to just dive in with the presentation and get started?
Yeah, I think we can get started. We have enough people on here to get started. If there's more, then I guess they'll just have to catch up.
Okay, and I guess I'll plan to speak for about 15-20 minutes, leave open 20 minutes-ish for Q&A, and then I hand the mic back. And as I understand it, there's two other speakers today, so I don't want to hog up all the time, of course. But
we also have Arnold. Arnold, hi Arnold, you there?
Yes, hello. Yes,
hey,
hello,
hey.
Arnold speaking.
Good to have you. Good to have you. Okay.
Okay. Well, let me share my deck. Give me 1 second. Let's see.
Hi, Brian. Hi. Hello.
Okay. Can everyone see my opening slide? Just says Hyperledger Meetup Riyadh.
I see it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And let me know if there's any challenges, you know, in quality or anything like that. Go ahead and speak up. I'll try to listen. And I have a chat box open as well with questions, and you can start loading some questions in there, but I won't necessarily answer them midway through, just you know, attention, that sort of thing. But anyways, thank you again. So Hyperledger, as many of you know, is a project of the Linux Foundation. It's an open source project. It's a public initiative, so anybody can be involved. Anybody can use the code. Anybody can around the world can deploy it commercially, make money from it. They don't have to pay us a dime. But as our sustainability model is really based on corporate memberships, corporations ranging from startup companies, and I'll mention quite a few of them in this deck, to large companies who help us, you know, who are, you know, reinventing their entire businesses around blockchain technology in many ways. And we've been alive now for 4 years. This is, I forget exactly when I joined Hyperledger. I believe it was late May of 2016. So I'm going on 4 years of involvement. The project, the first code drop was February of 2016. So just about 4 years in, and we've seen a lot of growth in the code ecosystem around Hyperledger, because you know we do two things really. We foster the creation of software, right? You know, through open source projects, through code. The code really is at the heart of what we do. You know, all the philosophy in the world doesn't really matter if you can't actually run software that accomplishes something. And then really that's the first half of what we do. The second half as Hyperledger, as staff and me and my team, is help build a commercial ecosystem around this code. So again, from the startups to the big companies, how do we all build a whole new sector together, right, of software but also what are all the different kinds of businesses you want in this space, right? And how do we professionalize it so that people know what they're doing? So we've been doing this now for 4 years, and we've, I think, some really nice stats to be able to show for it. 3 of the projects have had a 1.0 production release, which we consider kind of a sign of maturity, right? That this code is now ready to run, ready to be consumed by an audience beyond just the developers who wrote it. In fact, one of them, Fabric, has had a 2.0 release. Just came out at the beginning of this year. And as I'll mention, they just released 2.1. We also, in addition to all the actual core software development going on, we have 14 different pretty active working groups and special interest groups. The working groups are focused on kind of horizontal issues like architecture and identity and documentation and learning materials. And then the special interest groups are organized around domains, fields of interest like healthcare, like climate change, like the public sector, meaning government kind of operations, or capital markets. All of these different working groups and special interest groups are completely open to participation. So I encourage any of you to go look at that on the Hyperledger website and find a group of interest. And all of the conversations are archived. Most of those groups meet once every 2 weeks by phone, but also conduct a lot of their work over the wiki and over email. So that's really fun. Obviously, we have a very healthy Meetup community as well. This is something that David Boswell oversees and is a really big thing for us. There's 170 different groups on meetup.com in different cities. Some of them more active than others, for sure. But you know, about once a day, there's a Meetup happening somewhere in the world. There was recently a big virtual meetup in Pakistan, actually, that was conducted in Urdu, which I think is just awesome, like a sign of the reach of this technology community. And then from a corporate membership side, we have about 250 different companies supporting us. And I won't show you the logos, but you can find them on the website. And they're all over the world. In fact, 50 of them are in China. And I only mention that because, you know, really with this being an open source project, we have focused so strongly over the last, since I came in, on making this a truly international project, not just a US-led project or a German project or anything, like actually covering the same kinds of geography that a typical blockchain project might. You know, if you're involved in trade finance or supply chain traceability, your deployments are going to span international borders almost by default. And I think China has a big role to play in that. I think Saudi Arabia has a big role to play in that as well in the Mideast region as a whole. So really glad to see the international reach of our community. Many of you have perhaps seen this slide, but this is really just kind of a map of the Hyperledger ecosystem. We've divided some things up in a couple different categories, and I'll just briefly go into that. I'm sure all of you have heard of Fabric. Some of you might have heard of Hyperledger Bezu or Sawtooth. These are all what we call distributed ledgers. These are the databases, right? This is the data layer and the automation layer through smart contracts. These are also competitive. Now, it might seem odd for an organization like ours to put out products that actually have a lot of overlap, right? Think of these as horses in a horse race, or think of these perhaps more technically as different kinds of databases like you see in the SQL world, right? There's in the ordinary database world, there's a really big difference between the way that Postgres works and MongoDB. And they both can be used to store data and query data and automate a lot of things. But you know, as a technologist, you pick one versus the other based on a lot of very intricate details, and as well as the promises that those kinds of technologies make to the layers above. So some of them are at different levels of maturity, but I definitely encourage you to give, as you dive into this space, some time to each of these to understand their unique benefits. We also have some libraries that have been built, kind of refactored sometimes out of these projects, or intended to be projects that can help span these different ledgers. One that I'll point out in particular is Aries, which is a digital identity and kind of wallet technology focused platform. Another is Ursa. Ursa is very much focused on cryptography and on providing a standardized interface to underlying cryptographic protocols, and that's been adopted by Indy and Aroha, and hopefully soon many of the other projects. And then just very quickly through others, tools. These are kind of things that sit above the layer of the distributed ledger. It's projects like Cello, which is being used for managing networks of nodes that get deployed under Fabric, and Hyperledger Explorer, which is used to kind of walk through a ledger and see the connections between entries, that sort of thing. Caliper, which is a benchmarking tool, and Avalon, which is a tool for doing zero knowledge systems involving the kind of the secure enclave and Intel chips and that sort of thing, as well as zero knowledge cryptographic protocols as well. And then finally, most of what we do is really at the plumbing layer, the infrastructure layer. But we recently, we launched a project called Hyperledger Grid, which is focused on kind of standardizing the supply chain use case, right? It turns out every industry has a supply chain, even when you're dealing with digital goods, right? And so boiling up a little bit from that plumbing layer, that infrastructure layer, to something that's a reproducible use case in a lot of these different sectors is what Grid is focused on. And then finally, we have something called Hyperledger Labs, which is really focused. It's like a nursery. It's a place for projects that don't quite have their footing together or quite have their community together, to kind of sit and kind of mature, kind of outside of the spotlight. And a number of projects that became what we consider full-fledged projects kind of started life there. I should clarify, by the way, Hyperledger does itself, my staff, aren't developers on those projects, right? Aside from occasional contributions that I know Dave Hughesby makes to Ursa and that sort of thing. All of the code is being written by members of our community, from all of the developers out there, and it could be that many of you have contributed as well. So so that would be really great. The community is completely open to any of you to not only use the code, but if you find a bug or have a feature that you'd like to see implemented and have the ability and interest to participate in evolving that, we want you to be thought of as a member of the community to join it and contribute. In particular, let me just outline a couple of recent announcements. So Hyperledger Fabric was just hit its version 2.1 release. The 2.0 branch is still pretty young. 2.0 came out in January, and it had some pretty significant changes to the way that chain code works. Chain code is the smart contract layer. And Fabric has traditionally been a bit more centralized than your traditional, say, public blockchain platforms. But progressively, they've developed systems to be able to tease apart kind of dependencies upon your central operating kind of system, the central certificate authority, to kind of push out deployment of chain code, deployment of nodes to the edges. And so Fabric, the 2.x branch, continues that with some pretty major changes. Right now, the most stable release is still version 1.4. That is the one that's supported under the long-term support release. But I would anticipate Fabric 2.2 will be LTS and probably come out sometime in the summer. And Fabric, by the way, is the one that you see used in so many of the different networks out there, perhaps the most predominantly deployed, not just the most predominantly deployed Hyperledger framework, but the one that is perhaps most widely deployed at all out there in the enterprise blockchain space. I do also want to mention Hyperledger Besu. Besu came in last year as a new project. Besu is an implementation of the Ethereum enterprise client definition. This is basically using the Ethereum technology stack, the Solidity smart contract language, the way that nodes work on the public blockchain, Ethereum blockchain, but also being able to use that for enterprise needs for permissioned blockchains. So it has support for a couple of different consensus mechanisms and is being used in some enterprise production environments today. And so they just released version 1.4. There's a lot of momentum growing around that project. And if any of you have experience with the public Ethereum blockchain space, you'll find this a really familiar environment to work with. And the most recent project we added, I mentioned Hyperledger Avalon. It's an implementation actually of another specification that kind of came out of the Ethereum community called the Trusted Compute Specifications, published by the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. And this is really a way to try to bring much greater degrees of confidentiality to things like, to all sorts of use cases that ordinarily the default is to share every bit of information between the participants. Things like supply chain traceability. How do you implement a blockchain to trace where a diamond came from its source to its destination without also inadvertently exposing every bit of information about a middleman or a source or even a destination that could become a vulnerability in a market scenario, right? Knowing that this middleman was suddenly saw half the traffic as they did before, half the commercial flow, that's problematic, right? How do you support that traceability without revealing too much information? So that's what these kinds of technologies are really designed for. And I do again want to just emphasize there's interesting stuff happening in Hyperledger Labs, especially in the field of interoperability and cross-chain integration, but lots of little experiments too. So as more of you dig in and understand kind of the main projects, I definitely encourage you to spend some time here and see if there's something that meets your needs. We held just about a month and a half ago, a Hyperledger Global Forum in Phoenix, Arizona. We had 450 attendees. I'm not sure many of you remember, it feels like a decade ago at this point, but in early March, it were still kind of the beginnings of kind of concern about the pandemic. And so we were concerned about hosting it, but everyone still said we should move forward. So we took some basic precautions, and we did see.
Can I ask one question?
But it was a really good event. We had quite a few attendees, 450, lots and lots of content, lots of members of our community coming out and talking not just about the technology they're building, but the businesses they're deploying it to. And we captured it all on video. So you can watch everything from the keynotes and the panels to every presentation people gave. All of their decks, as well as their speaker bios and things, are also available on Sked. I'm happy to share this deck, by the way, out. Sorry I didn't share it ahead of time, but these links are clickable. So I'll make sure to get out. In fact, I could probably even, let's see, I don't want to worry about trying to get the link right now, but after I end, I'll put some of the links into the chat window. Let me just continue further. Further on to the topic of the COVID-19 situation, we are tracking a number of projects out there that are using different Hyperledger technologies, as well as some related articles of interest, we think, to implementers of this technology, at a COVID-19 page being managed by at the space on the wiki associated with the Healthcare Special Interest Group. So, and they touch on different use cases, some of them in digital identity, related to whether it's immunity credentials, being able to prove that you've had a vaccine, for example. That may be useful in how we figure out how to reopen society as we go forward, as well as in supply chain traceability around things like pharmaceuticals. Again, it might be relevant to getting vaccines out there as widely as we need, as well as potentially contact tracing, although it's not clear to me whether contact tracing is actually going to be a real blockchain use case or not. And we've really just tried to put up a radar. We're not launching a big initiative ourselves. We're not saying there's one true way to fix these things. Our role is to be connectors and kind of marketplace builders. And so we're trying to help celebrate and recognize the hard work that's going on in our community on this topic. One thing we have also invested quite a bit recently and seen a lot more interest in during the shutdown has been in training and certification. We have training courses up on edx.org, the really big self-driven educational platform out there in the world. And some of those courses also have exams at the end. And if you pass the exam, you can carry a certificate that says you are now a certified Hyperledger Fabric administrator or certified Hyperledger Sawtooth administrator, as well as a developer course that has launched. There is a coupon that's available till the end of this month for 30% off that are different training courses. So please feel free to use that. And then these certifications are also essential to something we call the Hyperledger Certified Solution Provider Program, or HCSP. And HCSPs are companies that can build blockchain systems for other companies, right? And prove that they have kind of the mettle and the talent to be able to do that. So we have a list now of 10 different partners who provide consulting and integration services using Hyperledger technologies as part of that solutions program. Let me talk briefly through a couple of different use cases that have kind of emerged in the last few months that we think are pretty cool. First, I'll start with just kind of an overview piece. Forbes publishes once a year, and this is the second one that they've done, something called the Blockchain 50, which is 50 major enterprises north of $1 billion in revenue a year who are using blockchain technology, enterprise blockchain technology for some core use. And we did a survey, we looked through those entries, and there are many companies that are using more than one of those blockchain platforms, because there'll be a lot of networks that companies will be joining as time goes on. At least 25 of those were using Fabric, though. And of course, we assume that this kind of survey is not complete, that there's even more usage than maybe some companies even know about inside their own companies. It always happens with open source. But 25 of them used Fabric, 2 of them used Sawtooth, 2 of them used Indy, and 1 each using Grid, Aroha, and Burrow, which is a really great footprint to have. The next closest was Ethereum, and it wasn't quite clear whether these were public or private instances. And I'm hoping the future version of this breaks out Hyperledger Bezu separately from the other Ethereum options, because I think that'll also start turning up well. And then you can see Corda and Quorum mentioned there. And so this gives us a lot of confidence about the footprint that we have. These are companies mentioned in the Forbes Blockchain 50 that are using Hyperledger technologies. Some really great names there, like Cargill and Daimler and Dole and HSBC, and it's a great list. And I think this is a testament to the production quality that's gone into these technologies and the confidence people have built in the engineering community around Fabric and these other platforms. So specifically on one of those examples on Honeywell, we have a case study that we have up on the Hyperledger website that you can dive more into, but they created a marketplace for used aerospace parts. It might sound strange, but the average part in it is used in 4 different airplanes in industry. And so having a marketplace that's really distributed for the buying and selling of these parts is pretty important. Honeywell has placed $1 billion worth of those parts in this marketplace, and so that's pretty remarkable. So she was actually at Hyperledger Global Forum and was part of a panel discussion, so you can see the video for that as well. On the digital identity front, there is a union of credit unions, like a consortium of credit unions called CU Ledger, who have developed a portable identity system for consumers of credit unions to be able to bring their credit histories with them between banks, to make it easier to get out a loan or take out a mortgage or open some other kind of account. And so this is really helping to unify the financial digital identity space for consumers, because credit unions are actually pretty sizable in the United States. And this mirrors a lot of different digital identity and KYC kinds of applications that we're seeing in the financial sector worldwide using blockchain technology. In the supply chain space, we've one of our longest term members, a company called ScanTrust, who have a really unique approach to doing QR codes, have started to deploy a number of different networks, tracking coffee, tracking pork product in the developing world, tracking all sorts of different commodities, and doing that for the purposes of food safety, as well as fighting fraud in the retail sector. And they've been pretty successful using Hyperledger Sawtooth as the underpinning technology. In fact, there's a presentation they just gave to the supply chain special interest group. You can see the notes and the recording from that if you go to that key page. And then Blockchain Technology Partners recently launched the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange platform using Hyperledger Sawtooth. And this is a chance to really, reinvent yet another kind of old world kind of system that was done very much through face-to-face contacts and some digitization, but kind of in a way that created some fragility in the market. And this solution will really help that community scale, that community address some trust issues that they had. And again, it's built on Hyperledger Sawtooth, so really fun to see. And with that, I know there's lots more that I could tell you about. I really don't want to bore people here. I really want to make this more of an open conversation. But that's just kind of a high-level overview of what's going on in Hyperledger, what's going on amongst our use cases. Certainly with the pandemic and the economic disruption that that's causing, we've been very hesitant to say, people have heard me say this a lot, I don't want us to be a hammer looking for nails in this situation. But whether it's in supply chain traceability, whether it's in digital identity, whether it's even, how do we really restart the engines of the economy? There's, during this time, a lot of businesses that will fold, that will hit bankruptcy, and new businesses being created. Maybe there's ways to use blockchain technology to make the bureaucratic process of starting companies and registering and engaging with governments on permits and that sort of thing. Maybe there's a way to use this technology to make those processes more efficient. All sorts of different kind of ways I think this technology will be used in the future to help us recover. And the timing is right. I mean, 3 years ago, you would not have wanted to put this into serious production, but now there's a lot of confidence that the platform works, that it scales, and that it's suitable for lots of different use cases. So with that, we're just hoping to play our part. And with that, I think I'll pause and see if we can take some questions. I wasn't sure if David or others, if you wanted to moderate this, or if you wanted me to try to pick some questions that have come in through the chat.
Yeah, Abdullah, you're hosting. If you'd like to moderate, you certainly can. I mean, let me know if I can help. And just to let people know, I have been muting many people to avoid background issues. So if you find yourself unmute and unable to speak, you can use the raise hand feature as well. And that will help us know who has a question. But
okay, thank you, David, and thank you, Brian. I think we can take some questions for a moment until we begin our discussion about policies with Brian and the rest of the discussion panel. So anyone who has any questions, please feel free to click on raise your hand, like David said, or feel free to write it on the chat. I think there's a few questions already.
Just going in reverse chronological order, I can take this question about, hi Brian, are there any Hyperledger initiatives going under consideration for central bank digital currency projects, which is typically what the CBDC refers to, so I'll focus on that. There isn't anything that is operational, right? But there is an interesting project that is being driven by Vipin Barathan, who leads the capital markets special interest group, called the eThaler project. And he's got some funny story around the name. Every name has some funny story. I don't know what this is, but it's a look at using something called the Token Taxonomy Framework, the TTF, which is another standard that's come out of the Ethereum enterprise space to model a central bank digital currency. We're really more about code than we are about kind of, essays or policy or that sort of thing. So, really, that is a project that I think is interesting. I've been following it kind of peripherally. There isn't like a drive to meet the needs of one country or another. But as I understand it, Hyperledger Fabric is underpinning many of the pilots that are being done by central banks around CBDCs. That's pretty interesting, but there isn't an overt kind of outreach or coordination kind of effort with those communities yet. Maybe eThaler proves to be an interesting basis for that kind of collaboration, but we're certainly we're not top-down driven in terms of strategy around different things. We tend to be more bottoms up. What people bring to us, what people tell us they want to work on underneath our umbrella, and so very interested in having conversations like that.
Brian, it's Marta here. I was wondering if you could also talk a bit about Iroha and the CBDC that they're doing with Bank of Cambodia.
Yes, one of the use cases actually that I'll sometimes mention is, so the Central Bank of Cambodia launched a payments platform system, I think initially as a proof of concept about 2 years ago, and then as a proper pilot, I think for the last year. And that the underpinning for that project is Hyperledger Iroha. And they chose Iroha because they wanted to have a mobile wallet that was directly connected to their blockchain. It's something that they're a bit more centrally managed about, but the premise of doing it under a blockchain was to be able to federate it out amongst the other national banks over time. But right now it's predominantly between consumers and the Central Bank of Cambodia. And it's using the underlying Iroha blockchain ledger, as well as mobile libraries that the Iroha team has built. So that's pretty interesting. Let me take.
Hello, Brian. Hello.
Yep. Hi, Rishad.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you, Brian and David, for your session. I'm a certified blockchain associate, and I have been working on that sawtooth by Intel. So my question is there any convergence like Fabric, and there is a news like they are going to converge, means Fabric and that sawtooth, but is there any news like that?
No, I mean, it's very natural to look at that list of 6 and go, does it have to be 6? Is 6 the right number? Is there any duplication between those 6 that is not meaningful, right? And I think if you look at any technology domain that has different competitors in it, there's over time what evolves is either natural differentiation. A hammer is different from a screwdriver, right? Again, MySQL or Postgres is different from MongoDB. Or if one truly doesn't have any differentiating purposes, it could disappear, right? And I do take kind of a Darwinian point of view into this kind of thing. I think each of these 6 it's up to the developers around those projects and the communities to provide enough differentiated value to not die. Not die, and not dying means that developers are still writing code and pushing things forward.
Yeah, means there is a competition going on actually from IBM and Intel. That's why I'm asking.
I mean, Intel was initially a big supporter of Sawtooth. For them, it was a demonstration platform for some of the secure enclave technology, and they have been moving to hand off that more to the community. And Intel also invests and has business involving Hyperledger Fabric. And we actually think that's going to be pretty normal. We think most businesses will be on more than one blockchain. The odds are that those 2 blockchains will be using different technologies. And so this is in the same way that businesses use 2 different databases sometimes, right? I think what is contingent upon the developers is to define that differentiation and make it worth it, right? Because if you're different but not for good reason, all you're doing is creating cognitive burden for your end users. And so there are some efforts out there to try to reduce that burden of having these different heterogeneous kind of environments. One of them is a project in Hyperledger Labs called the Blockchain Integration Framework, which looks like it's on track to be a top-level project sometime soon. And that'll be a way to at least have smart contracts on these different projects talking to each other, as well as to be able to conduct transactions that span these two different ledger platforms. So I think hopefully what we'll see happen in the Hyperledger community is more effort to try to simplify life for developers and for people trying to decide between these different environments.
Also,
but I don't think we're going to see suddenly 2 of them wake up and go, let's get married and merge our code. because that's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
hard thing to do.
yeah. Also, from a jobs perspective, actually, they are asking for 8 years or something experience. Actually, I'm trying for job actually. From job perspective, if you are talking, actually there is no such opportunity like that. It means years and years of experience in full stack plus Hyperledger or plus blockchain. They are asking like that.
Yeah,
I'm
this is
a
hard
junior
stuff to
developer.
write.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I'm a junior developer, and I have done certification in both Ethereum and Hyperledger.
Thank you, Rashid.
Also, yeah,
Thank you, Rashid. We will have to move on to other questions because there's
okay,
other.
sir. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I speak? Yeah, quick question for Brian. Thank you very much for sharing all these details. Actually, it's a quick question and I hope you can help on it. My understanding, the main reason behind blockchain is to switch to a decentralized environment. And as we know, most of the solution implemented these days are private solutions, which means we need someone to deploy these solutions among all the players and the ecosystems, right? So the question is, after the application or solution is deployed, what will happen to the admin that was once deploying this solution? So are we back to the centralized environment? Thanks.
I think we're back to the centralized thing if you do it wrong. And if you do it right, the way that what should emerge after, I mean, I think it's inevitable that there's a bootstrap stage, a beginning stage, where you have a technology vendor who, or a partner who kind of pulls everyone in the room, says, what's the use case? What are we trying to solve? Let's do a proof of concept. Let's do a pilot. Let's even launch this thing. But I think in order to make sense to do this as a blockchain project at all, somewhere in there, and certainly shortly after your production launch, you really want to empower the participants who are standing up nodes and the business community who are really representing those nodes to have a governance model around, being able to host their own nodes and how do we add new participants with their own nodes that are being provided from their own providers, right? And then how do we coordinate a system upgrade, right? If it's a disruptive kind of upgrade, kind of what they call a hard fork in the public blockchain space, right? And that can still be done in a much more decentralized way than a typical centralized cloud service today, right? If you're building a banking network or a supply chain traceability network, it is still much better to have those 10 banks or those 20 different players in a supply chain. Even if they're not operating their own node, they're deciding who gets to operate that for.
Hello.
Have we lost you, Brian?
Yeah, it looked like
I
Brian
think
might have frozen. We can give him a minute to
yeah,
pop back in.
we lost him.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, you just froze for maybe 10 seconds.
Okay. My main point is the whole point of doing things with blockchain is you do want that diversity and freedom of choice when it comes to who's running the network and not be fixed on a single provider. And that inevitably these things will start by being hosted by a single technology provider. But the customers, the end users, the people who are the businesses should start to demand that these networks be federated out and more decentralized as more time goes on.
Thank you, Brian. I think this was a good question that leads us up to our discussion today regarding the adaptation of blockchain and its policies. Now, it's inevitable that businesses, governments are all really trying to scramble around to adapt regulations for blockchain so that businesses can start to deploy them, government entities, and public and private services. And this was a good question right now that I think is one of the aspects within that matter. But what's your perspective as far as policies being shaped around the world?
It's a good question. It's certainly true that blockchain has the attention of policymakers. I've been involved with the World Economic Forum for quite a few years and going to Davos, and am on the Blockchain Council for the World Economic Forum. And blockchain topics are on the agenda at every one of these events, for everything from whether it's central bank digital currencies, whether it's remaking how supply chains work. And you can't really remake how supply chains work without involving the ports authorities and customs, right? Without involving the policymakers in any of the commodities that you're talking about exchanging. Even things like traceability for diamonds are a mix not just of commercial interest, but also social impact interest. Part of the move to use diamonds or blockchain technology for the diamond trade is to fight slave labor in the diamond industry. And so this is front of mind for a lot of people. And I think in some ways, it almost strikes me that the policymakers and the strategy folks sometimes better understand the need for blockchain technology than Silicon Valley. And I think that comes a bit from the traditional Silicon Valley company being very comfortable with centralized technologies. But once you get out into the real world, once you get out into how decentralized the real world is and heterogeneous the real world is, you realize you need platforms like this. Where there's still a need, I think, is in helping the public sector understand things like digital signatures. Like if there's evidence recorded in a blockchain, how do you trust that evidence? Compared to evidence written and signed and sealed, by a notary on a piece of paper that's sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere that you can look at. That physical evidence is something you can always show a judge or an arbitrator or something to prove something, right? People are used to that mentally. Mentally, a lot of people, especially in judges and other parts of the bureaucracy, might still not understand, how do I trust signatures and evidence of things that have been written to a blockchain, right? And so there's some need to rationalize that. I think there's also a need to address the substantial amounts of concern that regulators have around cryptocurrencies and distinguish that and the uses of that for illicit purposes and such from the enterprise uses for blockchain technology. Now, the permission blockchains are, I think, a bit more understandable. This is a network. The participants are known on this network. It's not about hash power. It's not about running a scammy financial operation. This is about transparency. This is about visibility. This is about process and process enforcement. And so in some ways, I think the regulators that I've talked to who really get this understand how this actually helps regulation be more efficient, be more automatable, helps us catch bad actors more quickly, and prevent whole categories of fraud. So there are some countries that I think are further along this learning curve than others. I think Dubai actually really did call it well early on, and it's been great to see the interest in it grow there.
Yes, I agree. And it sounds like a lot of this is actually reshaping policies and procedures within these entities or within these workflows, whether it's be between and industries or, for example, as you mentioned, the digital signatures. That's going to change the way judges look at things and notary offices. Now you're changing the whole procedure behind that. So it is, I feel, with the experience I have now for the past 2 years in the blockchain space in Saudi Arabia, and I think maybe Abdurrahman, you would agree with me, that we're coming at a point where technically blockchain is being understood, and it's easy for people to, I think, understand with the help of the internet and YouTube and all the content out there. But and then you have that, okay, how can we really adapt it? There is some of these low-hanging fruits, I would say, that are these use cases that are very simple to adapt, doesn't consist of much entities. Like, for example, the certifications. I know that's one, Abdurrahman, that you guys are working on. But when you talk about larger use cases that involve cross borders between nations and digital signatures, it becomes more complicated that the entities themselves who are initiating these ideas tend to back off because they feel that it's above their capacity, that this has to really become on sort of a policy shaping discussion now, because you're talking about reshaping policies, you're talking about reshaping everything really, and working through this blockchain, trusting this blockchain network that is completely new.
Yeah, it's right. Actually, along with the huge potential to disrupt businesses and government operations as well, it presents many challenges as with the all emerging technologies. Innovation, expansion, and also the development have been and will be led by both startups and major technology companies. So collaborating and pushing each other to develop sustainable models, as with any disruptive technology, it is appropriate that a strategy needs to be adopted to both foster innovation and control any missteps that may occur due to experimentation and some inevitable misuse. So these strategies vary from technological routes that address scaling and privacy directly, and also through standards that address interoperability, to policy that aims to establish an environment for the technology to flourish and deliver its value. So establishing the right policy environment is the most important factor from my perspective in mitigating the challenges, and defining a way for organizations to cooperate according to these defined rules.
Yes, I agree. Arno, do you have something to add? You're muted, by the way. We can't hear you.
So now it's better, probably. Excuse. Yes, I was listening to it, and if I reframe it a little bit, and it's exactly fitting in the kind of solution we provide. So I'm from the Dutch Blockchain Language Association, and what we offer is language technology that fits on top of a blockchain that enables people who are non-programmers to express themselves in an easy manner. So write down the compliance procedures by accountants and by lawyers. And our compiler, it's a mathematical based translation function, compiles that language, that structured language that's easy readable into computer code. So basically we are platform agnostic. So we run on now mainly on Ethereum, but it's happened by accident. So also on Quorum and other platforms, but well, Hyperledger is of course also a great candidate. But said that, we focus a lot on the domain knowledge. So the industry, the policies, because blockchain is in our opinion all about compliance and certification. So what is maybe more important than the platform itself is to be able to speak to those people who want to enter the code and want to see it and want to validate it. So that is where all our effort is focusing on, and that fits in basically this discussion.
Amazing. I think you guys play a significant role in this.
Well, it's also, well, we are now in a phase that there is a lot of awareness, that people realize, yes, it could be a very good idea to have a language layer on top of a blockchain, any blockchain, and to focus on readable and maintainable code. And see basically a blockchain as an engine, and we have then maybe what we call the interface. And yes, it is a topic, because we have some problems now. What we basically saw last year, we call the ICO winter, for example, that making blockchains is not that easy. It can be done. We can do things, but changing something or making something of a larger scale, yeah, then you run into problems like maintainability, and that's where we focus on.
Yes, yes. Abdurrahman,
Is
did
it
you?
clear? Because it's all. Excuse me, please go ahead.
No, please, Arnold, go ahead.
Yes, yeah, it's always difficult to bring a complete new concept in a very short time and in front of the screen. But basically, we like to realize that there is, blockchain is really great. It brings a lot of benefits. We all agree on that. And what we basically see is that when you have a new kind of invention, that you also need some tools around it to let it work. It's like, for example, the car. The car was a great thing, but it's not an engine on 4 wheels. You also need steering, rubber tires, and even roads to let the whole thing work. And that's what we also say. We believe that a proper interface, a language layer on top is very essential. And in that, we put a lot of routines and solutions that are not easy to host inside the blockchain technology itself. For example, a mechanism to change and adapt something. The blockchain itself is not made for that, and there is also not a lot of space to provide such a solution. But in a language layer, you can implement that. You can make things more maintainable.
Yes. Well, I hope you guys are considering Arabic language.
Yes, of course. The input language is really easy to do. That is because it is a subset of the natural language. So if I take, for example, the Dutch language or the English language, it's basically 30 pages. So, and then to translate that into, for example, Arabic would be quite easy to do. It's a matter of days. And then I have an Arabic version, but of course it is a rough translation, but then to go into the specifics of a local version, well, we need maybe to do some programming, but that is easy compared to changing a domain. So, for example, if you have a specific version for the oil and gas industry, well, that is really a different language than, for example, for a pharmaceutical industry. Because you express yourself in a different way, and you like to build in those routines and call them in an easy manner.
Yes, yes, but it's definitely a significant technology that plays a role into assisting blockchain becoming widely adapted, because nevertheless, you have these non-technical people and professionals who are one day going to use the blockchain to extract data, to make decisions, to perhaps make judges or rule out any consequences that have been made within the network itself. So definitely, I've heard a lot about Ricardian contracts, and maybe you have your own share in that. That is one example of these tools that are assisting the adaptation of these technologies. And as you said, it's not just having the vehicle itself, but all the other the essentials around it to make this vehicle drive in the road, right?
Yes, exactly. Thank you. It is basically machine-generated code. So and because it's made by a mathematical translation function, so everything what is generated is then error-free, because once you know how this translation function is, and it's math, so you can prove that, then everything that is translated is is of a high quality. And if you build something in any industry, we are used to use machines to make things. You can dig a tunnel with a shovel. That is a good idea, but everyone knows by now that you need these big machines for that. And that is, I believe, the same with generating a large amount of code that you want to maintain. There must be a kind of structure and semantic model that you easily can maintain. And it must be done in natural language. If you want to express yourself regarding compliance and certification in your region, and of course you must have an Arabic language, otherwise it doesn't match. You cannot express yourself and being compliant with your laws.
Of course, of course. So I see that at this very moment, we are seeing that a lot of these players are coming up, like yourselves, who are assisting the adaptation of this. And I think at this very moment, education and training is the most important factor, or I would call it the bridge that will take us to the other side, to really see blockchain becoming more adapted in our daily lives around different industries, public services. A lot of this has to do with education because, like I said, going online and reading about blockchain itself to understand its concept is not hard, but it's how you're going to apply it. And as Brian mentioned, it is an open source technology. So I think for the technical individuals, they're able to go on and read and sort of have these access to libraries. But then you have the academic professions, if you will, that are not having much of content online for them. I mean, I've done my research, and I have a hard time finding sort of an example to demonstrate to the local entities here of a successful policy adaptation for blockchain. And maybe Brian, you have more exposure with leading organizations around the world. Maybe you can tell us about some of these, if there are any examples of policy makers who have at least released an initial version for blockchain networks.
Who've released a policy update or launched a production blockchain system?
A policy update.
Policy. So yeah, I mean, it sometimes feels like every government out there has at least convened a blockchain working group. I'm actually on the state of California's blockchain working group, and we're putting out a report talking about all the different use cases and potential for it here in the state of California. We have had inside Hyperledger members who are associated with governments since almost the very beginning. And just in the United States, we've seen deployments of it relating to procurement by the General Services Administration, that sort of thing. Obviously, there in Holland, there's been a lot of high-level support for it from the Dutch government, and not just in policy, but in funding pilots and that sort of thing, which has been great to see. And so we have actually a whole special interest group focused on this. It's called the Public Sector Working Group, meaning broadly stated, you know, the uses of this technology by and for government, and lots of use cases that they've turned up, lots of examples that they point to from their wiki pages. So definitely encourage people to go there. And the policy side, you know, policy does tend to have to drive things in government before they're willing to spend $1 on something. They tend not to just experiment and see where something goes. So all of those projects were preceded with lots and lots of internal conversation, I think, about what the right policy to take is there. Again, I just want to emphasize, for a lot of governments, it's a challenge to separate the enterprise blockchain use cases from the cryptocurrency conversations. And I think in most cases, you know, once people actually spend the time on it, they understand the difference. But we're starting out from a point of view, or a starting point that is challenging in many cases.
Yeah, and also for the government updating for policies, um, this is also dependent on the appetite for innovation. I believe policies can be either restrictive or permissive, and leaning too far to either end of this spectrum can yield negative results. Stagnation if the policy is too restrictive, or harmful compromise if it's too permissive. So a good policy should aim to achieve a stated set of goals, define its scope of operation, and be clear on how to operate under this policy in a compliant manner. But most importantly, define who the authorities are to be involved in this update of policy. Also, policies, they have to evolve in a continuous improvement cycle to adjust and to adjust to the lessons learned and the rapidly changing technological and global landscape. As you mentioned, there are many countries have taken steps to establish such policies for jurisdictions, varying in both purpose and approach. The United Arab Emirates has been very active actually in this space. They just launched several programs that include a blockchain platform for government entities. And also in Saudi Arabia here, we see legislative sandboxes for fintech startups. These sandboxes enables the startups to explore the implications of the technology on the way the business is being conducted. And this will also help to aid in defining what regulatory changes may be necessary to adapt to the developing landscape.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely the appetite is what would drive these adaptations. And I mean, luckily here in Saudi, we do have some amazing sandbox programs that are really driven to explore these new emerging technologies. And most importantly, the fintech space, I think, is one of the leaders in adapting these technologies, just because of the wide disruption that they're having with e-payments and tokenization and many other factors. And I've seen also recently that capital markets have an appetite as well, because you have one major topic surrounding security tokenization and its implications on business. I mean, it's widely attracted to capital markets. Capital markets are very attracted to it. But again, I believe that because of the complexity of the technology itself, perhaps, we see maybe some resistance or some hesitation to really go full force. And I believe it's up to us who can bring this fear sort of to a minimum by providing them with proper educational content, examples, linking up with different global influencers, whether it be from the Hyperledger Foundation or other communities, to bring the best examples and to showcase and to demonstrate, that would sort of encourage them to move forward.
I would like to add to the conversation.
Sure, go ahead.
My name is Brett Carpenter, and I'm from Michigan in the United States. And my treatment and my methods on policy and supply chains have to do with taxation, with geolocation. And so digital twinning is what we're doing firstly with a Siler geospatial instrument. And then from there, taxation, I feel, should be at the top of this conversation with geolocation, because once you laser scan a building, you actually turn it into, you actually turn it into object-oriented code. And then from there, the building can elect to be an entity. And so I think that the future of taxation with blockchain is very promising. And that was what I wanted to add to the conversation. Thank you.
Well, that's interesting, Brett, and I'd love to learn more from your experience. Are you referring to tokenization when you say that you guys are basically shifting these buildings and registering them online? Is that coming as a token, being registered as a token?
Well, right now we're working up our proof of concept. So that is something that I'm being incubated by Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan. And we're also working with different policymakers in Lansing, Michigan. So yes, I would love to have more of a conversation about this with you. And again, my name is Brett Carpenter, and you can reach me on Meetup or on the thread after Brian puts all of this on the email thread.
Sure. Well, thank you, Brett. Thank you. I think from my side, the discussion is going quite well. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add, Brian, Arnold, or Abdurrahman, but we can look into taking some questions right now.
Yeah, sure. I just would like to point to one of the issues that the blockchain industry is facing, which is the lack of developers. There's a huge demand for qualified blockchain staff is increasing dramatically. And also the blockchain landscape suffers from a serious shortage of sufficiently trained and skilled people for developing and managing such complexity of peer-to-peer networks. And I believe that the technology is still in its infancy and it's still evolving. So it requires time for the developer community to adopt it, and for educational institutions as well to introduce relevant blockchain-related courses. Though this will ease the market demand, the result, however, will become obvious only after those trainers and students will finish the training, and that will make it will take some time to observe.
I agree, certainly. A lot of this has to do with training for both technical and non-technical.
Yes, I'd like to add something here because I think it touches again the point of maintainable code, and also who has to code. So blockchain is about compliance and certification. It's more a job for a lawyer or an accountant, but we all know that lawyers cannot code. That is not how they are wired. And well, maybe there are some exceptions, but not. This is not the solution for a large amount of coders we need. So that is why we plea for a language, a semantic or a natural language on top of the blockchain. So imagine, I give you an example. Imagine in a year of a few years from now, Google Translate comes with the solution that you can basically talk to Google and it translates into computer code. Well, of course, we all know that that doesn't work with Google Translate, because Google Translate is guessing the translation. We know that it's a nice translator for natural languages, but not for natural language into computer code, also not for one computer code into another one, because the engine they use is wrong. They are guessing the translation. What you need is a formal translation function. So basically the same fabric where the blockchain is made of. So that's first order predicate logic, just mathematics. And then you are able to let people write down the code in a structured manner, just like, for example, the lawyer uses the legal language. The legal language is not the same thing as a natural language. You cannot do poetry using legal language, but you can instruct the legal system in a very structured way. So that is what we like about legal language. We need to have a language that is understood by the people who write the code, the managers, the lawyers, and the machine. And that is where we close the gap, and that is why we believe that such a language layer is very important also for education, because then you can answer the question, who do we want to learn to code? And maybe it's not called coding anymore. We call it legal engineer, for example. That's our word, what we use for this kind of job.
Certainly, certainly. Amazing input. I think we have a question, and this question is from Mr. Tariq to Abdurrahman, asking, how do you see blockchain status in the upcoming few years in the kingdom?
Oh, yeah, sure. The current status of adoption for the blockchain technology, it's kind of investment dependent. It's very much influenced by current and upcoming regulation and the overall government attitude towards this technology. In some cases, regulation is missing, and that uncertainty can spook a lot of investors. But by adapting business-friendly regulation, like in some of the European countries, like Switzerland, Estonia, and Malta, they have become fertile ground for many blockchain startups. So also for the current local companies, there's a growing number of companies that have expressed their will to enter the blockchain arena. But after some number of years in which the focus was mainly on the benefits of blockchain in various areas, in terms of speed, cost, streamlined operations, and increased efficiency, their attention now tend to the various challenges and bottlenecks that are preventing widespread adoption. So corporates are afraid now of the disruptive character of blockchain, but at the same time, the organization that do not like the idea of blockchain and its disruptiveness character, for some, it's just a nightmare thinking that they will lose market share or will even become obsolete. If you look at it, blockchain is only taking about 80% business process change, and the other 20% is just technology implementation. So it represents a total shift away from the traditional ways of doing things. And then this even goes for industries that have already seen significant transformation from digital technologies, like the supply chains companies who just recently applied SAP systems or something similar. So it places trust and authority in decentralized network rather than in a powerful central institution. And for most, this loss of control can be deeply unsettling. So I believe it's still uncertain who will be most affected by blockchain implementations and which areas of the businesses are likely to be mostly disrupted. A more imaginative approach is needed to understand opportunities and also how things will change.
Can I speak one? Hello.
I agree. Just a second, Brian. Do you have anything to add in this discussion, or can we move on to taking questions now?
No, I'm very happy to move on to other questions.
Okay, thank you. I guess someone was about to ask something. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Thank you. My question is actually, UAE has adopted blockchain technology for land sector, right? So till now, actually they have started early, but till now that it is not developed actually fully. So my question is, means for a real use case, is it that much scalable?
And so was the question for which use cases is blockchain scalable?
For land sector actually. Land sector means once it is registered in land, once land is registered in blockchain, then it will be impossible to malpractice, right? Yeah, that's the case, because the document is put into blockchain like that. UAE has adopted, firstly, I think UAE has adapted that to land sector.
Well, talking about scalability is extremely hard to do in the abstract for blockchain platforms, because even though there are some real limits to transaction rate, and those limits actually, are highly dependent upon things like the number of nodes, the consensus mechanism you're using, the latency between nodes if they're not all hosted in the same place. Even the question of transactions and how they apply. By the way, if you could mute, thanks. Of those transactions and how they map to the use case is very abstract, right? I haven't yet seen a use case where proper architecture and engineering couldn't actually support very high volumes of real business. What it requires is somebody with an architectural mind thinking about, how do I actually minimize what I need to write to a blockchain, right? You don't actually have to write all of your data in every transaction. You can post hashes, for example. If all you're trying to do is verify the integrity of a document, just taking a hash, posting that hash to the blockchain, or a hash of a sequence of documents. If you want to record 10 documents, make sure they all can be verified. You don't even have to record 10 hashes. You can record one hash, as long as all those documents can be available to be verified by everybody, right? So there's a lot of tuning that can go in, and architecture that can go in, I think, to handling any use case. In the raw, the highest use case or highest production volumes I've seen out there have been on the order of 700-800 transactions per second. And land titles, when I looked at this for another kind of project, the typical recording office for San Francisco County sees maybe a few hundred transactions a day, right? So easily, I think for that use case there isn't a problem there.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
We have another question from Wa'ed. How government policies will encourage companies to adopt blockchain? It's not an open technology and could be implemented without the need to government. I'm not sure what you mean by the question. Do you mean how could government encourage companies to adopt? And then you have another question there. Okay, so it's directed to Abdurrahman. Abdurrahman, if you can answer this, please, as this question is directed to you. So give us your input about this, please.
By the government itself, in order to reflect this as a collaboration and as a push to the other companies to have and develop their own sustainable models. So yeah, as an open technology that you can adapt by yourself as a company, you can always start implementing blockchain solutions and DLT technology as well. But still, you need some legal cover in terms of data exchange and to have a strategy to be adopted to control any missteps that may occur during this experimentation.
One thing that occurred to me to mention is there's a project in India that was built by Reliance Jio, but also in conjunction with the other major telecom operators to build an anti-spam tracking network that was actually mandated by the Indian government. The Indian government passed a law related to fighting spam with in SMS messages in India. And in the letter of the law, it said, we need the private sector to build a shared database, a distributed ledger, and they actually use the word blockchain in the regulation in order to coordinate the set of everybody's mobile phone numbers, right, and their spam preferences associated with that, right, kind of as like a national do not call kind of record. This project has launched. It's in production. It uses Hyperledger Fabric. It has hundreds of millions of records in it. And it actually is a decentralized network amongst those different telecom providers. I think we have a use case out there. I know that earlier this week, there was a presentation given to the telecom special interest group on this project. And there's a lot of interest in this. And I think as an example of kind of a top-down mandate, it probably is pretty good because it actually did lead to an implementation. But I think all of the top-down mandates are meaningless, perhaps even actively harmful, unless they actually are targeting the right kind of project, something that actually needs blockchain technology. And in this case, they wanted to avoid one phone company being the center of that database, right? So they needed it built bottoms up. It was the right kind of use case, and the technology was actually ready for that use case, right? So more of this kind of combination of top-down and bottoms-up, I think, would be really good to see.
Yeah, and this is actually what we need to have organizations leaning more towards an innovative rather than risk-averse approach to blockchain, as the latter will be prohibitive to launching successful initiatives such as this one you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think
Hello,
this is a
can I add a question?
Excuse me. So from what I understand, Brian, is that this company actually led the initiative, and then once the company, the government understood its potential, and then it went ahead to actually make it part of a regulation.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how much of a research came ahead of the regulation, or if I don't think Reliance Jio built a thing and then went to government and said, "Can you mandate this?" I think the government had heard that blockchain technology would be a promising way to implement this, but it was definitely the mandate that got all the other telco companies in the room with Reliance Jio, and this is like Airtel, Bharti Airtel, I think it is. I don't remember the others, but to actually get competitors to cooperate is a really hard thing. And I think that's the most important role that government can play, is as a convener, as a way to say, okay, we're going to work with the private sector. We want the private sector to build this, the majority of this. Maybe they would run a node on such a network as a peer, right? So that they have skin in the game, so they're participating in it. But I think the most important thing governments can do is say, we want this to be a shared network. We don't want one company to be the center of the network. And so we're going to pull all the right people in the room and talk about how to build that as equals or as peers, rather than as a federated top-down thing.
Right. Well, it's definitely a great example, and I hope to see more of that around the world. Okay, so back to the person who was trying to ask a question. I'm not sure who it was. I didn't catch your name, but if you're still on there.
Hello, I'm Mohammed Khalil. I'm the organizer also for Hyperledger in Istanbul and Kuwait. Actually, I would like to ask a question for Brian. Like, while the world is heading into a global recession, how would Hyperledger help in rebooting the global economy?
That's a hard question to answer. I think the drivers that were behind the investigation and adoption of blockchain projects, before the pandemic, are only more so afterward. The need to find efficient ways to make supply chains flow and to bring verifiability and credibility to those supply chains. I mean, we have a problem right now in the United States where many of the masks and personal protective gear and others coming in, people are scrambling over themselves to try to, outbid each other to try to figure out how to bring them in. And then there are reports of some of these shipments that are coming in from, fly-by-night operators who take the money and then never actually ship anything, or if they do, it's very substandard gear, different than what was promised. Well, this is a problem that supply chains have always had. We're feeling it really sharply right now, but we have institutions and we have practices and policies, and blockchain technologies can help those operate at a much more rapid clip, right? Much more automated clip. Certainly when it comes to things like trade finance or capital markets, the more efficient that we can make financial operations, the easier perhaps it'll be to start new companies. There's going to be a lot of companies going out of business over the next few months.
Sure.
And as the economy gets back up, maybe there's the opportunity to start new businesses. But if there's a lot of bureaucracy around starting businesses in different countries, that will slow things down, right? So I don't know. My hope is that we can play a role. It's definitely not a silver bullet, and a big answer to anything, but it's, I think, a part. I think all of the things that were true before the pandemic about why blockchain was important are even more true now.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any questions? Any other questions?
I did see one in the chat about the GDPR, and thought it might be worth answering. And I give my take. Should I jump into that?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So as obviously most people know, the GDPR is the privacy regulations passed in the European Union. And generally what they state is that if you have personal information about somebody and you're a business, that person has rights related to that data. Even if you didn't collect that data from them, even if you bought that data from somebody else, they have rights. And some of those rights involve knowing if you have that data, but also being able to correct that data if it's incorrect, and not being able to ask you to delete that data if you have it, even if you bought it from a third party. And you have to get their consent before sharing that data on to somebody else. And there's all sorts of exceptions and differences in the healthcare setting and that sort of thing, but that's generally the big idea. In a blockchain setting, that means a couple of things. I mean, the most important thing it means is you don't want to write any personal information to a blockchain, right? And personal information is not just somebody's, eye color or weight or home address. It's also their purchase history. It's also their, their financial history in other ways, or information even about them, right? And so most of the ways that enterprises are building these systems avoid completely writing personal information to a blockchain. It might write a hash of that information so that you can verify, okay, Brian's address was this and was recorded at this time, and there's like some proof that that I actually have that address or something like that. But the actual raw text is never written to the blockchain. And so if you follow that principle, following the GDPR is very easy. In fact, you could even use a blockchain to verify that you have all the consents to share somebody's information that you need, and that consent hasn't been revoked. And this is very useful in areas like pharmaceutical drug clinical trials, where so much of the bureaucracy around running a clinical trial involves managing this information about the consent you've received from patients to share their data as part of the research. So lots of interesting ways in which blockchains might actually make following the GDPR and auditing compliance to the GDPR easier than if it was using a central database. But at the very least, there shouldn't be any concern about whether blockchains themselves are GDPR compliant. It's really in how they're used that you have to look at, is that use compliant or not?
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, question to Brian in this point. Yeah, Brian, actually the point is here, not, I don't know, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. The point here is to convince governments that what have been written in shared data is not personal information. Now you have to go through the route to prove, okay, this is how it's working and how this is it works. So it's another whole different story, correct?
I think there's a lot of education to happen out there, and I think there's a lot of things that we also need to figure out with policymakers. So, for example, if you take my home address and you hash that, right? That hash, maybe that's something we can record to the blockchain. But if somebody else were able to try to, or to hash that address, they'd get the same hash. They'd be able to see in the blockchain that that might be associated with me, right? Even though they didn't know what that, what the original source of that hash was, they were able to reverse engineer it by trying every address or something. And so there are subtle ways in which even hashed data, even things that we think might have removed any personal information, might still accidentally reveal that. And this is something that we need to work out with policymakers and work out with technologists, both on the side of the people building these things, but also technologists at privacy organizations or academic researchers trying to study the right way to build these things and understand, lots of governments are worried about worst case scenarios, right? And planning for the worst and trying to reduce our risk to really bad outcomes, right? And something hopefully will get more focus coming out of this. And so they're always going to be looking at edge cases, always going to be looking at what happens when things fail. And that's something that as technologists, we don't do often enough. And so those are really good conversations to have.
Yeah, I think I can add one point actually. Hello, Brian. Yeah, means right now in the field of quantum computing, many researchers are there, and also open communities are there. So with advancement in quantum computing, I think many cryptographic hash can be broken, right?
So there is a whole separate field of questions around, if quantum computing gets better and better, what parts of the blockchain infrastructure are at risk, right? And there are quantum safe encryption algorithms that make it progressively harder and harder, right? There are techniques that are weak from a cryptographic point of view and stronger than in others, in general anyways. And so I do think that over the course of time, and this has happened in other security sectors, pretty much on a once every 10-year basis, we see newer algorithms adopted, stronger techniques. The good news is I think we can always stay ahead of the advances in computing, whether using quantum or even traditional technology. We're not going to wake up one morning, I don't believe, to a quantum computer that can suddenly, process an arbitrary number of qubits and therefore render all encryption moot. I do think the hard question is, if you have a long-lived blockchain network that where it's going on for 30, 40 years, and some of the older entries in that ledger, the security of those entries, the security of those tokens, perhaps, are based on an encryption algorithm that suddenly is weak enough to be compromised by advances in computing, quantum or not, does that cause a problem, right? And it might be if you're Satoshi Nakamoto and all of your original, million Bitcoins or whatever, are secured in a way that, potentially could be vulnerable to a future computer, right? In 50 years, could somebody reverse engineer Satoshi's private key and spend his million Bitcoin or whatever, how much it is? Possibly, right? That could be a problem. And so I do think that blockchain communities do need to think about mitigation approaches for long-lived projects, right? We're not at that point yet, but it is a once a decade kind of horizon thing for these projects to be thinking about.
Amazing. Okay, are there any other questions? I think there's another question to Brian. Is there any lobby body promoting blockchain to policymakers for education purposes in the US?
Yeah, there's actually two groups that I think are worth mentioning. One is the Chamber of Digital Commerce, who are based in DC, who they're not quite lobbyists, but they definitely try to educate policymakers and think tanks and others in DC on what blockchain technology is, mostly around the cryptocurrency side, but increasingly around enterprise blockchain use cases. And they operate somewhat at the state level as well. And then another group called the Global Blockchain Business Council, who operate a little bit more at the international layer, who are also very much about educating policymakers and mainstream kind of business makers about what blockchain technology is good for. And Hyperledger is members of both of those organizations. I've spoken at their events. We did a whole lot with GBBC and Davos this year. They're really well-run organizations. And I think they're trying to do really, really good, sober kind of work in this space. And so I'm sure GBBC would be interested in connecting with many of you in Saudi Arabia or in the region around potentially conversations around with your policymakers if you think that'd be helpful.
Sure, we'll definitely talk about that later on. Thank you, Brian, for that. Are there any other questions? No? Okay. Then I think from my side, I have nothing else to add. Abdurrahman and Arnold, any last words?
Yes, Arnold here. Well, what we see in the discussion is that making blockchains is very promising. Probably even bringing a solution to the world in desperate times, because we all like to go ahead after what is all happening to individuals, but also to our economy, and we need to have a vision, and we need to have a promise, and well, it's quite logical that we find this promise somewhere within technology. And then blockchain is very promising, especially because it is about compliance and certification and organizing ourselves. Maybe we have to reinvent a little bit how we organize ourselves around the world. And well, you always have waves of centralization and decentralization. That's the nature of management and organization theory. And then it becomes very logic that you like to focus on a technology like blockchain. So it's a great discussion with a lot of angles to watch at, and we saw that today.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more to it. I mean, this discussion could go on deeper and deeper into many parts, but it is a wide discussion. I think, Brian, you gave us a good understanding from your perspective. And Arnold, thank you for sharing with us the amazing work that you guys are doing. And Abdurrahman, thank you for being on with us as well to give us some of your perspective and participating in this. For everyone else, thank you for attending, and we will be sharing further information with you all. Brian, you shared the presentation on the chat, I believe. Yes, I think
yes,
it's on there.
Yes.
So for anyone who missed that, you can find that now on the chat if you just scroll up as a Google Doc.
And I'll post the recording on the Hyperledger YouTube channel and just a little bit after this. And definitely we'll share it out. The Q&A covered a lot of interesting topics I think others will be interested in.
Amazing. Well, I look forward to maybe conducting another one like this. This is great.
Yes, for sure. Thank you again for hosting, and thank you to everybody for dialing in.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Such a great opportunity. Appreciate it. Thank you, Lima Global Tech,
Bye, everyone.
for such
Thank
an
you.
event. Wonderful event.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Stay
Thanks, Brian.
safe.
Thanks, Brian.